Okay. Hey friends, this is Katie from the Parish Group. I'm joined today by Tommy Kennedy from Villanova University, and we are going to be doing a test dry run of our Summit 2026 presentation. This is not a side quest, all about gamifying training with interactive forms. We're really excited to bring this one to you. This is part of our recordings for YouTube, so this is a little behind the scenes, and wish us luck. Let's do it.
Alrighty. So, what we're going to do today, we're going to start with some introductions and a little bit of a backstory about how we got here today. Then Katie's going to give us a technical walkthrough of how do we actually build a quiz using the form builder. Then I'll take over the reins again and I'll walk through how we at Villanova used that concept and built it out into a full-fledged gamified system for training our new users. And then Katie will walk us through how we can take that even one step further with a few more bells and whistles using a user data set. And with that, I think we can dive right into our introductions and a little bit of a backstory. And Katie, you're first.
Woohoo. So I like presenting because really what I like to do is make people look at photos of my dogs. So please observe, aren't they adorable? I have been working in Slate for coming in on 12 years now. My background was overwhelmingly admissions, and then I moved to consulting about 5 years ago. So you can find me as the Senior Director of Slate Strategies, and I'm one of the co-user group leaders of New England Slate users. We are the Parish Group, so a Slate Platinum Preferred Partner, a one-stop shop for all of your enrollment needs.
And my name is Tommy Kennedy. I serve as the Associate Director of Operations and Systems at Graduate Liberal Arts and Sciences at Villanova University, if only there were a few more words in that title. My formal background is in information systems and high-level programming, as well as higher education administration. But in terms of my Slate specific experience, I was an admissions user for about 8 months. And then right after that, I was dumped straight into the Slate captain role for our admissions instance. So a little bit of trial by fire there. I've been in that role for 4 years at this point, and I am also a super user in our student success instance as well, and have been for about a year. I work at Villanova University. Like I said, we're a private Augustinian institution that has been around for 184 years at this point. We're right outside of Philadelphia, and we serve about 10,000 students in total, about a third of whom are graduate students, which makes my life a little bit more interesting. The shared graduate and professional admissions instance that I work in has been around since 2019, but we also have an undergraduate admissions instance as well as our student success instance, which has only been around for about a year. In my neck of the woods, we serve 66 graduate degrees and certificates spread out across 20 different departments. So it's a lot of moving pieces. I'm sure some of you have more, but I'm sure plenty of you have less. And as is very relevant for this presentation, at one point this fall, our admissions team was comprised of 80% brand new users, which made my life a little bit interesting. So with that, we'll dive into the backstory. I have a nice little timeline set up here from February 2022 to December 2025, which might lead you to believe that this is about to be a chronological story, but boy, do I have news for you. We are starting in May of 2023. At that time, I was what I like to call a baby Slate captain. I was at my very first Slate conference ever, which was the Pennsylvania Slate Summit held at Shippensburg University that year. And I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what I was doing yet. I had no idea where I was, who I was. And I had just gone to a session by the incomparable Abby Mullen, now of University of Delaware, titled Not Your Grandmother's Reports. As I quickly learned, they weren't my reports either. Data Explorer had just launched. I barely knew how to build a regular old report. I wasn't ready for Data Explorer yet. So I left that session, and the imposter syndrome was really at its peak. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. I was unprepared for this. So I sort of just wander into whatever session is happening next, which just so happens to be Formulating Your Slate Introduction by none other than Katie Jordan, and she was teaching us how to build quizzes using the form builder. So I'm seated up toward the front like the studious person that I pretend to be. And after 5 or 10 minutes, I'm like, oh, wait, I'm getting this. I know what she's talking about. It feels accessible, it feels doable. I'm taking my notes and I'm making connection. I'm understanding things. The confidence is building back up. The energy is building back up. We're feeling good. We're feeling great. I can do this. And it's in that moment that I decide to sit on it for 2.5 years. I didn't have an application for it quite yet, but I knew it was going to be important. So now let's back up a bigger picture a little bit. From February of 2022 to August of 2025, that is over 3 years, my team had no new admissions counselors. I don't know how. That's not normal. These tend to be relatively high turnover roles, but somehow we got blessed and we had no one new to train or to onboard for over 3 years. And boy, did that come back to bite us because come August of 2025 to November of 2025, then 80% of our team was brand new. And to this point, because we had no new admissions counselors before, I had never trained anyone in Slate who was using the system to that extent. I had trained folks who were reviewers or decision makers who need to use Slate for very specific purposes as necessary, but never folks who are going to be in the system day in and day out. So I knew that what I normally did for training was not going to work, and I needed to cook up something brand new. And that's when I had my light bulb moment, and I realized I finally have my application for what I had learned from Katie's presentation. And I could leverage quizzes in Slate to assess knowledge throughout the training process so that I could sort of take the temperature of the room and see where we were at. And then I decided, well, why don't I take that a step further? This was a shower thought of mine where all of my best ideas come from. My dean has offered to install a shower in the office so that these happen a little bit more frequently. And why not use those quizzes as a foundation of a full-fledged gamified training system to make it a little bit more interesting and engaging and hopefully a little bit more effective too. So that's exactly what I did in relatively short order. And then in December of 2025, Katie and I reconnected. I thanked her for all of her lovely work and told her about how transformative it was for our training process. We got to chatting, and so was born this presentation here and now. So now, just like was my experience, we're going to start you all off with a technical piece of this and think through how do we actually build a quiz in Slate. Katie, it's all you.
All right, let's do it. So we thought what would be a little bit more interesting than just showing the back end of all the quizzes, which we will do, is having a little bit of an interactive element to this presentation. So this is scannable on your phones. I will say this is the first of four scannable QR codes. So if you are, interested in joining us with these, please do so. The first three are hosted by the Parish Group instance. They are set to not create any records, and you will also notice, in addition to that safeguard, there is no place to actually put any personal information in. These are purely anonymous, just so you can get a feel for the experience. And I think we're good to keep going. We can always, pause because this is this is a recording. All right. So the quiz that we just showed is closest to what Tommy saw in 2023. That is just going to be our traditionally graded black and white. There's a right and a wrong answer to this. So I built this now and also a few years ago using images from our Slate library. So this one was social media icons because to be honest, that's what we had in our library. But back in the day, what I had used was the Slate navigational icons from the top bar of the menu. So any images work, but it could also be all text. Something that's going to be consistent throughout the builds that I show today is none of these are mapped fields, and they are all instead just using export codes. The biggest change from 2023 to now is how we are doing the grading. So back in the day, I used ones and zeros. So this is the back end look at the first question. So we can see the export of Q1, and then we can see the four different prompts that we're using throughout the first quiz. So we can see that Facebook is a one, and the other three answers are A, B, and C. So if we used the one for Facebook and zeros for the other three, we could still get a correct percentage of how many answers were correct. But what we lost was the data on what incorrect answer was selected because Slate saw them all as the same zero. So the letters work much, much better here because Slate is, of course, smart enough to say, like, A, okay, that's not a one, that's not a zero. But it also helps to distinguish the incorrect answers from each other. So for the grading of the first quiz, uh, it's really straightforward. This is a hidden field, so it's calculating in the background. So we have the export key of total, which makes it easier to reference in our landing page. Our data type is real because we are doing some math here. And then all we're doing for our calculation formula is adding up the Q1 through 4. So what it is saying is if you had the correct answer, you'll have a 1 there. If you had a letter, it will be a 0. And then for the percentage, you can see again, export key, real data type, adding up the 4, dividing by 4 for the 4 questions, and then multiplying by 100 in order to get to our percentage correct. Quiz 2. Tommy, I'll pause here just to share the anecdote. I think I've told you. The PA Summit presentation that you always talk about was the first time I ever did an in-person presentation. And it's always so nice to hear that like, you enjoyed it so much because I was terrified. I had done like online presentations before, but that was my first time standing in front of a room talking to an audience, and I was scared.
Now, how am I just hearing this for the first time all of these years later?
Really? Oh my gosh, yeah, that was it. That was
That is crazy. Never would have known it. And here we are doing a virtual presentation now.
And here we are, right back in the comfort zone before summit. All right, shall we continue on? Excellent, thank you. So this is going a little bit more in what I like to kind of lovingly call a BuzzFeed direction. So a little bit more fun, a little bit more 1990s Cosmo personality quiz. So like the first quiz, it's all the unmapped fields, and their big difference is that there's no longer necessarily a right and a wrong answer because it's based on what you think and how you are feeling. So rather than using ones and letters in order to distinguish the different answers, we are just using the different valued letters. So this is the complete back end of the quiz. So what we can see here are the 5 questions that you answered. The counts, I believe, are completely hidden. So we have 4, 1 for each letter. And then we have a percentage for each letter, which do show themselves eventually. So we have the 2-part grading that we just looked at. Our first is to gather the counts. And so we have the label of A count, the export key of A count, the data type of real. And then we have a string comparison that is running the calculation. So I do want to pause here to say that this formula was actually developed based off of a Technolutions community conversation about how to use calculation formulas in forms. They run that one twice-ish a year. It is a great one. It's been very inspirational to me. So just to kind of shout out that as a community resource while we are here. So in the case of this formula, what it is saying is if Q1, your answer was A, you get a 1, otherwise a 0. And then plus the same thing for Q2, 3, 4, and 5. And so we are then able to calculate our percentage using that A count that we just calculated. So all we are doing is concatenating it with completely fun made up terms. These are unfortunately not real. But the idea is that we are saying, okay, you are this percentage a slate wizard based on how many, in this case, A counts that you received, and then adding the percentage sign at the end. Now, this is the bottom part of that exact same field. So it does show to you after you complete the quiz. And the way we do that by filtering is saying that each question has been answered and that for at least one of the questions you did select A. So it's read only, but you are able to see your results at the end of the quiz. And quiz number 3, the hard one. If you've ever seen me present before, I am like pretty fond of going in order of difficulty, which also tends to correspond with how much I like the build. And that is also going to be true in this case. I feel like again, like we can pause, we can keep going, so let's do it. Okay. So once upon a time, when I was building this quiz, this was the easiest one. There was not back in the day a grading system. I've built these in a lot of instances as just a little bit of an assessment to see how users were feeling about different areas in Slate, to get a feel for opportunities for training, to see if people weren't interested in learning certain things. For the build today, I focused just on queries, but this can be built out very, very extensively, or even using a series of them, completely up to you. But I like a good self-assessment. But for Summit, we wanted to go a little bit harder. So, this is the first quiz that's using a rating scale rather than our prompt lists. So, we are still using an unmapped export key. And I do want to note that our quiz today, this one was specifically optimized for mobile viewing. It actually looks a little bit funky if you are taking it on a desktop computer. And I'm just making a note of that. While you're thinking about building these for your audiences, if you're going to have people scanning them in a conference hall, mobile optimized. If you're going to be having people taking them at a desk, perhaps desktop optimized. So just a little nuance there. Our grading here is going to be done in 3 different steps. So we first need to concatenate a list of values that Slate can read based off of all the answers. We're interested in the mode or the most frequently occurring value. And then we want to return the result based on the mode. I'm going to note that the mode is calculated with a lot of JavaScript. I'm not going to be getting fully into that build today, but I am going to go ahead and include the entire formula on a slide for reference. So the first step of the grading is with the export key list of selections. So we're just going to go ahead and use a calculation formula with a divider in order to pull each of the values. And step 2 is the hard one. So we can see that the export key is mode here, and the calculation formula is all of the JavaScript, and we can see the referenced list of selections and our dividing split. On the left hand of the screen is the entire written out JavaScript for you because it did not all fit into my calculation formula screenshot. And then step 3 is our result. So this is actually a string comparison, really, really similar to the second quiz. I should look up how much text a calculation formula field can hold because I know it's a lot, but I never remember how much. But it is, as far as I know, like a lot. So this one is returning the mode. And if, for example, of course, if your mode is 1, you can see that your most common answer is new and not interested. And then kind of so on and so forth. So if it was 2, your most common was new and interested. And if we go to the next slide, we can see the end of the formula. So saying, yay, you are an expert. And I do want to specifically note that after the final 2 dividers, I have the most common is you have a tie. So in this build, a user can have more than one mode. They can have more than one answer that occurs the most frequently. So you can continue to build this out to say if your mode is 4 and 5, you have a tie and it's between these two. So you can include all of that information. For this build, I simply went with a unique answer per number and then a shared value for having a tie. And take it away, Tommy.
All right, I think that was pretty cool. And that's where my head was at many years ago. So now let's think through. We have all of this good information. How can we use that as a foundation to build out a full gamified system? Yours might look different than mine. You also might have a completely different application for these quizzes. But I just want to walk you through what Villanova did in case it might be a little bit of inspiration for you. So when I knew that I wanted to gamify my training, I came up with four core building blocks that I needed to achieve that. And those are levels, missions, milestones, and achievements. But then I needed to ask myself, what really are each of those things so that I can adapt it to this context? So a level is really just a tier to represent progress or skill level. A mission is ultimately some kind of a skill building experience. A milestone is a signifier of skill progression, and an achievement is recognition for mastering a skill. But now I needed to bring that back and come up with applications for these things either in Slate or for training. So our level becomes our user roles and permissions. Our mission is ultimately the onboarding and trading experience. Milestones are how I'm bringing in those quizzes and I'm using those as knowledge checks at the end of every training session. And finally, for achievements, I can build a progress dashboard that has a user scope so that it's right there on the Slate homepage for all of my users. So now I'm going to walk you through each of these four components and how I built those out for our system. So on the left, we have what our user roles looked like before, and then our after over on the right-hand side. You can see in the before, these were more categorical or descriptive roles, which meant that they were a little bit more rigid. If you are a program director, you are assigned the program director role, and there's not really room for much else. And if I'm just glancing at this, unless I have a really good memory, I don't necessarily have 100% solid understanding of what kind of access you might have. I can sort of back my way into the answer by thinking through what roles and responsibilities does each individual person have, but that's a lot of thinking. I don't necessarily know offhand, okay, does the marketing and communication user have more access or does the student services user have more access? It's not 100% clear. I really have to dive into each of those user roles and what permissions come with it. So then I transitioned to our level-based roles. I went with level 0 through 8 because that's what worked for me. These are a little bit more fluid. So maybe a program director starts at level 2, but they're really engaged. They're clearly capable of doing more in the system. Maybe we can bump them up to level 3 or level 4. And it's also easier for me to manage because I can easily see when I pull up any user, okay, they're a level 6 user, they have a decent amount of access to the system, but maybe not all the way there. But it's a quick way to at a glance understand where each of my users are at because I have over 200 of them. I don't remember exactly where everyone falls. But now let's think through the philosophy behind this. If this is a path that you want to go, you may have already done it because this is not a novel idea, but it might be as simple as a semantic shift. You're just renaming what all of your roles are and you don't need to make any adjustments. If that works for you, great. Simple is better a lot of the time. But this might be a good opportunity for you to do an audit of your user roles and permissions, and that's what I did. The categorical or descriptive roles that we used before made sense. I understand why they were built that way, but it didn't necessarily account for varying levels of skill or engagement among users of the quote unquote same type. So I had to shift my mindset beyond who needs access to what to who can or should be trusted with access to which tools. There is no one size fits all approach. It'll never be perfect. So if you're taking this path, I encourage you not to get hung up on the details, which is something I had to let go of myself because if I was going to account for every bit of nuance among all of my users, I would have had 50, 100 different roles, and that's just not sustainable to maintain. They also probably won't end up being perfectly linear. I know, for example, that my level 3 has a couple of specific permissions that my level 4 actually doesn't have. So they don't perfectly build upon one another, but it works for my particular set of users, at least right now, and if I need to adjust it later, I can. But what ultimately matters here is creating pathways for growth and advancement among my users. And it also allows me to be a little bit more creative with how I'm setting up these roles as well. And I did that by creating my level 0 and my level 0.5, which maybe aren't so typical in a regular level system. My level 0 is just a Slate account. It comes with no permissions, and then I can provision access to specific tools or items as necessary for that individual person. So I'm not giving any more access than I really need to. And then I created level 0.5, which I call my floating role, which I use exclusively for training purposes. Because as we're working through our training modules, the goal is really to be advancing from level 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. But it's not going to be that perfect either during the training process in particular, because we're going to run out of time in one session, and maybe we got halfway through what we needed to, but we still have a couple pieces of outstanding. Or maybe I realized that my folks did not get session 3 and we need to backtrack a little bit. So this allows me to be a little bit more flexible than my already flexible user roles. And it also makes my life a little bit easier when I'm training a group, so I can grant access to those new tools just to the role rather than clicking through every single individual user account. So those were my levels. Now for the missions. I'm not going to tell you that you need to completely reinvent your training. If you have a system that works for you, great, use exactly that as is. But if you're looking for something different, as I was, you might consider restructuring your training to align with those new level-based roles that you created. So when I did that, it meant pivoting some larger sort of information dumps of everything that my users could possibly need to shorter, more focused, and more frequent sessions that were based on the tools that were becoming available to them with each subsequent level. And the feedback that I got, as you can see in the word cloud down at the bottom of the slide, was positive. People thought, like, even though Slate can be a little bit intimidating because there's a lot that you can do with it, they didn't actually feel intimidated by what was being provided to them. And it was a little bit more bite-sized, and they felt empowered to use these tools on a day-to-day basis, which is great because it means that our users are feeling comfortable. And it also means that I get a little bit of an ego boost because I built something that people really like. So now, our milestones. We're back to those quizzes. This was really the foundation of what made this system work. Like I said at the end of every training module, I used a quiz as a knowledge check to check in with those users and be like, okay, did you actually understand what we went over? I have a QR code here so that you can check out one of the real quizzes that I used with my users. Um, don't worry, I turned off submissions, so you're not going to get dumped into my instance. And also don't fret if you don't know all of the answers because I really did get specific to our policies, processes, procedures. So you're going to see names that you don't recognize or questions that might not quite have anything to do with Slate, but are relevant to what we talked about in that session. I found that this approach held my users accountable. They knew that they had to pay attention in these training sessions because they were going to get quizzed on the information, because we've all had a training session before where someone was nodding off or was knee deep in their inbox. But it also provided helpful feedback to me because these are new folks to my institution. They're in a new environment. And when you're brand new, it might be a little bit uncomfortable to raise your hand and be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So it took the burden off of those folks to be bold and be brave in that way, but still gave me the feedback and we let the data speak for the user's experience. And if something didn't quite land, I could clarify, review, reframe, and make sure that they actually understood it before I let them loose and they were actually engaging with these tools as part of their regular work. And ultimately, when we were done with all of these knowledge check quizzes, those new users who went through this new training process have asked fewer questions than any users I have ever trained before, even the ones that are just using Slate as needed, maybe a couple times a week, a month, a year. And I think that's really a win. I'm happy to answer questions. I invite them. My door is always open. But I also love when questions aren't necessary because people really get it and they know what they're doing. So we wrapped up with our official onboarding experience. And I thought, well, how do I keep these good vibes going? The energy is high. People are excited. They feel empowered. So why not continue to encourage them to build their Slate skills beyond what is absolutely necessary as part of their onboarding experience or day-to-day responsibilities? So I created these badges and this achievement system to incentivize their engagement and to spark a little bit of motivation. Now that will look different from one user to the next. I have one who is straight out of undergrad. He's a gamer. He's really about this. He wants to earn those achievements and get his badges. I have another one who could not be bothered. She wants to do the work, but don't give me a badge. I don't care about that. And then somehow I got my dean roped into this, who was very enthusiastic, but naturally has not touched it since because why would he ever have time for that? So it'll look a little bit different, but my experience so far has been that it works at least to some extent and gets people excited and maybe a little bit competitive. I have also found that it's a helpful tool for me because folks need to run their work by me if they want to earn their points, because I need to update their scores. So I have a very close eye on what they're doing at all times, which means that they're new users. They're still going to make mistakes even though they went through their training process. But now I can intervene earlier on and catch those mistakes before they might be repeated several times or might impact things in other ways. So it's been very helpful for me as well. And it has been really low effort, but very high impact. So I have my badges here. You're welcome to steal these graphics so I can send them to you. You can see that they're marked with the query icon because that's what we're starting. We're starting with configurable joins, and we're eventually going to build to things like reports and deliver. And folks start with bronze and can work their way all up to legend status, and we can go beyond that if necessary. But I think legend is a pretty good endpoint there. In terms of the point system that I developed, it's really kind of arbitrary, but I modeled it after the Slate certified point system that Technolutions uses. So folks start with an introductory training on configurable joins that I host, and then as they're just building queries in their regular work, they can earn points for those. I also send out monthly query quest challenges, which are a little bit more difficult prompts, but that are relevant to the work that folks are doing at that specific time of year. They can earn points for completing those. And then, of course, if Slate hosts something or organizes something around queries, they can earn points for that as well. And then those are loaded into our progress dashboard. Again, that's a user scope dashboard, so it's right there on the Slate homepage. And folks can track their progress and sort of see how they compare with their peers. And my last slide here is just the back end of this dashboard. It's super simple. All the stuff on the left are all of the styles that make it look pretty and like an actual progress bar. And then on the right-hand side, we have a snippet of code that we repeat for each user that displays their actual progress bar. And there are 4 things that you need to switch for each user. The first one is just a link to the image in your image library that corresponds with the achievement that they're currently working toward. That goes on the left-hand side of their progress bar. Then number 2 is the class name as you established it in the styles over on the left that corresponds with what tier they're currently working on. That just color codes it and makes it look nice and coordinated with their badge. And then numbers 3 and 4 both are their percentage on that progress bar. So number 3 controls the actual size of the progress bar, and number 4 is the numerical display right there on their screen. And that is all she wrote in terms of how we built out our fully gamified system. It's not terribly fancy because frankly, that's all that I had time for, but it met the moment and it kept my users engaged. So now I'll pass it back to Katie and she can help us think through how we might take this even one step further.
So let me just start this part by saying I'm a terrible friend, right? Which is Tommy sent that build to me, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. You know what you need? A user data set. And this poor man was like, Katie, did you hear the part where I built this in 2 weeks? And I was like, yes, but yay, a user data set. I couldn't convince him of it at the time, but this is a little bit of my continued pitch for that value. So we're going to be thinking about this just as the inspiration. I'm not going to be getting into the whole data set build today. But everything that we've shown so far is thinking about the person base because in Slate right now, as of, pre-summit, whoever knows it'll change, you cannot scope a form to be users. If you build a custom data set around your Slate users, yay, then you can begin to scope forms, portals, everything to that. And that allows for a lot more customization, changes over time as people are taking these quizzes. But that's my pitch in a nutshell. And I do have a little asterisk of thank you, Dave DeBoer. He is what I think the absolute champion of the user data set is. And he gave me a little bit of help as I was getting started. So thanks, Dave. So this is a back-end look into the creation form. So you'll see that we have a very, very small handful of fields. Um, the person creating the users is responsible for putting in first, last, email, and username. The device type, and record name are all running on hidden calculations. So very, very minimalistic approach to the fundamental record. The big magic trick here is what we can see on the right-hand screenshot of linking the Slate created dataset to the Slate created user. So the user, Katie Jordan, is the dataset record, Katie Jordan, and tying those together really helps Slate to understand that these two records are both me. So what I have from there is a portal, and you can see that the scope is my data set of Slate users. We can see that I have a lot of different methods going on here. So you start to see that this is going to be with the goal of presenting my quiz results to myself. And then the second screenshot, um, I think I just included to say that I name things neurotically. So we have 5 different queries here. We have one for each quiz, and then we also have my user information. So this portal may look slightly familiar to many of you. I did borrow this from the Clean Slate Advancement environment, so I think that's my second thank you to Technolutions today. So updated the branding, updated the content and navigation. And we can see here that Slate is saying like, hey, Katie, you've taken 7 quizzes so far. Something I do want to note is that there are 4 quizzes shown here, and I did only show 3 today. That is just because for the sake of timing, I merged 2 of them together. You are not missing out on any of the content. Assessment and percentages got merged into one. And then if we continue down our left-hand navigation, we can see that I took the assessment on 2 days, but I took it 3 different times. So I wanted to show here that we are able to, with the user dataset portal, really easily see how people are progressing over time. So on the next slide, what we can see is the pop-up of if you click on one of those results. So in December 2025, I was feeling like very, very good with a lot of Slate, which could be exciting if on an earlier result there were areas that I was not as interested in or didn't feel as comfortable navigating. And then the same kind of thing for the other quizzes that are available. I just wanted to show what each pop-up looked like, but spoiler, they're very similar, so we can see how I managed all of these changing over time. And that is my user data set pitch.
Alrighty, so as we wrap up here, when these slides are eventually posted to the knowledge base, we have a bunch of resources here for you. Each of these blocks is actually a button that will take you to knowledge base articles that are relevant to what we talked about. The University of Alabama actually did a similar kind of presentation. They gamified their training system. They took a little bit of a different approach, but I still think it's really cool and wanted to share that with you all in case what we talked about today maybe doesn't quite meet your instance. And then Katie has been kind enough to share with us a suitcase code for that self-assessment quiz that she reviewed with all of the JavaScript so that you're not starting completely from scratch.
Woo.
And that is about everything.
Yeah. I like to include a bunch of QR codes at the end. So if you wanted to hang out with us on LinkedIn, even if you are watching this in the future and have any follow-up questions, that does lead to an inquiry form that sends to both of us. So let us know. Woo.
Good stuff.